My brother-in-law told my autistic son, none of the normal kids cry from fireworks, then winked at me in court like he'd already won. When I begged him to stop this, he said, "You'll regret this. You think this ends here?" I stayed silent. That was 8 months ago. This morning, he was standing outside my apartment in tears. My autistic 5-year-old with tears in his eyes looked at me and said, "When I grow up, will I be normal?" I didn't understand where this was coming from because he didn't seem to have a bad day or have anything bothering him. But at our family party, my brother-in-law told my son, "Stop crying. None of the normal kids cry from fireworks." I couldn't believe him. Despite everything, my son was high-functioning and super intelligent. He just always thought in the back of his head that he wasn't good enough to be with everyone else. When my wife left, he was only 4 years old, and she told him that he was defective and that God turned away from him. And after she left, her family started hovering over us like a pack of seagulls circling a French fry. First came the unsolicited advice, then the visits. Then Jared, the ex-brother-in-law who once left my son alone at a gas station by accident, started showing up more. "You've got to toughen him up," Jared said. "He needs to learn to stop whining over stupid things like sound." That same week, he tricked my son into getting into his truck for ice cream, then left him at a playground 3 towns over, and called CPS on me for neglect. It thankfully didn't stick, but it planted a seed in my in-laws' head that I was unfit to parent. Soon after, my ex-wife's parents filed for emergency custody, but they didn't use the gas station or the ice cream incident to prove their point. Instead, they used my son's autistic behavior to prove that I was abusive. As an example, they cited that him screaming during a thunderstorm was proof I was abusing him. They also cited that him biting a classmate when his sensory overload hit was proof I was teaching him it's okay to be violent. It didn't matter to them that my son loved me, that he couldn't stop jumping up and down and hugging me every time I came home from work. All that mattered to them was taking him from me. And so, they gathered screenshots, twisted the narratives, and hired a sleazy lawyer who looked like he took pride in getting predators off the hook. All I had was my son and the truth. When trial day came, I knew the courtroom would overwhelm him, so I did what I always did. I prepared him. We read court transcripts, watched old proceedings, practiced with stuffed animals. I explained what custody meant. I showed him how to breathe when it got too loud, and I made sure he knew that I loved him more than anything in this world. In the courtroom, the in-laws sat smug, Jared winking at me like he'd already won. As expected, their attorney painted me as negligent. He said my son needed proper structure, even fabricated a lie about me laying hands on him. It was a nightmare. When he was finished, the whole courtroom looked at me like I was a monster. I looked over at my son, expecting him to be sad or nervous, but instead, he was mad, like he wasn't about to let someone lie about his dad. He got called on stand, and just like we practiced, he began speaking, but he didn't follow the script, at first anyway. Instead, he started going off. That man was lying. Never talk about my dad like that again. He never hit me. He loves me. When mom hit me, he stopped her. I love my dad so much. He never lets my peas touch my mashed potatoes. He puts labels on my bookshelves so I can find every story. He doesn't lie, ever. The room stilled. I know Article 3 of the Family Code, my son added. It says the court wants what is best for me, and what is best for me is staying with my dad. My in-law's lawyer tried to immediately object, but the judge held up a hand. Let him finish. Dad doesn't make me feel different like they do, my son said, pointing at Jared. He makes me feel normal, like I'm actually cool. I love him. I wiped my face. I hadn't cried since my wife left, but that day, I couldn't stop bawling looking at my son. The judge ruled in our favor. Full custody to me. No visitation rights were granted to the in-laws. Jared stood up, red-faced. "This is a joke." The bailiff approached him as he continued to yell, "You'll regret this. You think this ends here?" They were escorted out, but as they passed, my ex-mother-in-law said, "You don't know what you've started." The bailiff's hand rested on his holster as he guided them toward the exit. My son's small hand gripped mine tighter, his breathing already getting faster from the confrontation. I scooped him up, feeling his whole body trembling against my chest. Outside the courthouse, the bailiff walked us to a side exit. He glanced at the parking lot, then back at me. His weathered face showed concern as he pointed to a service road behind the building. I nodded my thanks and hurried that way, my son's face buried in my shoulder. As we reached my car, I spotted Jared's lifted truck circling the main lot like a shark. My hands shook as I buckled my son into his car seat. He watched me with those big eyes that missed nothing, already picking up on my anxiety. I took the long way home, checking mirrors constantly. The truck appeared twice in my rear view before finally disappearing. At home, I carried my sleeping son inside and laid him on the couch. My fingers flew across my phone screen, ordering new locks, security cameras, and motion sensors. Every click felt like building a fortress against an approaching storm. Within an hour, I had appointments scheduled for installation the next morning. My son woke up as I was taping cardboard over the lower windows. He rubbed his eyes and watched me work, his little forehead creased with confusion. He climbed onto the kitchen counter to be at my eye level, something I usually didn't allow but couldn't bring myself to stop today. He tilted his head the way he always did when processing something difficult. His hands flapped slightly, a sign of his growing distress. I stopped taping and turned to face him fully. He studied my face for a long moment before his bottom lip started to quiver. His question came out small and worried. He wanted to know why those people were so angry when all he did was tell the truth. The innocence in his voice broke something inside me. I pulled him into a hug, feeling his confusion in the way his body stayed rigid before slowly melting against me. I tried to explain in terms he could understand. Sometimes grown-ups get upset when they don't get what they want. Sometimes they stay angry even when a judge makes a decision. His logical mind struggled with this concept. Judges were supposed to make final decisions. That's what all our practice sessions had taught him. My phone buzzed on the counter. Unknown number. Against my better judgment, I opened the message. The words made my blood run cold. They were watching. They were planning. This wasn't over. I deleted it immediately, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. The next morning came too fast. The locksmith arrived at 7, followed by the security company. My son watched from his breakfast spot, methodically separating his scrambled eggs into perfect squares. He counted each bite, a self-soothing behavior that had intensified since yesterday. The doorbell rang just as the locksmith finished the front door. I checked the new video feed on my phone. Nobody there, but a package sat on the porch. Through the window, I saw a note taped to it. My son noticed my hesitation and started rocking in his chair. I stepped out quickly, grabbed the package, and locked the door behind me. Inside was a photo album. Pictures of my son at school, at the park, at his therapy appointments. Pictures I didn't take. Pictures showing someone had been watching us for weeks. My stomach churned burned as I shoved it into a high cabinet. The school called during lunch. My son was in the office, having a meltdown, but that wasn't why they called. Someone had tried to pick him up early, claiming to be authorized family. The secretary, thankfully, had followed protocol. When they couldn't provide proper documentation, she'd refused. They'd left angry, making threats about lawsuits and custody orders. I broke every speed limit getting there. My son sat in the principal's office, his weighted vest on, headphones blocking out sound. His favorite teacher sat nearby, maintaining the careful distance he preferred when overwhelmed. His face was blotchy from crying, and he'd clearly been stimming hard. His hands were red from repetitive clapping. The principal showed me security footage, my ex-mother-in-law and someone I didn't recognize, arguing with the secretary, getting increasingly aggressive until threatened with police. My son had been in the library when it happened, but somehow he'd known. He'd started screaming about bad people coming before anyone told him. I took him home early. He wouldn't let go of my hand the entire drive, something he hadn't done in months. His progress with independence, so hard-won through therapy and practice, seemed to be sliding backward. At every red light, he checked the locks on his door. That evening, while installing window alarms, I heard a car slow down outside. My son heard it too, his superhuman hearing picking up the engine change. He ran to his sensory tent in the corner, pulling all his weighted blankets inside. I peeked through the blinds to see Jared's truck idling at our mailbox. After 5 minutes, he drove away, but not before I saw him take pictures of our house, our cars, even our trash cans by the curb. Everything was evidence to them. Everything was ammunition. I closed the blinds and found my son had built a fortress of pillows around his tent. The next morning brought new horrors. My car tires were flat, all 4 of them, slashed clean through. A note under the windshield made their message clear. I'd stolen their grandson. This was just the beginning. I called the police while my son watched from the window, sorting his toy cars by size and color with increasing speed. The officer took photos and filed a report. He seemed sympathetic, but warned me that without proof of who did it, there wasn't much they could do. Family court battles, he said, brought out the worst in people. He'd seen it before. His partner mentioned getting cameras for my driveway. I didn't tell them about the 6 I'd installed yesterday. My lawyer called while I waited for the tow truck. Her voice was tense. The ex-wife's family had already hired a private investigator. They were building a case for appeal, looking for any sign of neglect or abuse. She advised me to document everything, every threat, every incident, every interaction. Build our own evidence file. My son's teacher called that afternoon. She was concerned. He'd spent all morning under his desk, refusing to come out even for his favorite activities. When she'd finally coaxed him out with his special interest books about trains, he'd asked her if bad people could take kids away from school. He'd made her promise to not let anyone take him. The weekend brought a brief respite. We stayed inside mostly, building elaborate train tracks and reading every book in his collection twice. He'd developed a new ritual, checking all the locks before any activity. Door locks, window locks, even the locks on the toy chest. His anxiety was becoming part of our routine. Sunday night, my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Silence at first, then breathing, then Jared's voice, trying to sound reasonable. He just wanted to talk, man to man. Work this out like adults, for the boys' sake. I hung up and blocked the number. Monday morning arrived with new challenges. At drop-off, I noticed other parents staring, whispering. My son noticed too, his hand tightening on his backpack straps. Inside, his teacher pulled me aside. Someone had been calling the school, asking questions about my son's behavior, claiming to be from various agencies. The principal was handling it, but she wanted me aware. Work was its own nightmare. I'd taken so much time off for court that my projects were behind. My boss called me in, expressing concern about my focus and commitment. Someone had called HR about my unstable home situation. Anonymous, of course, but the damage was spreading beyond just my personal life. That evening, while making dinner, my son had his worst meltdown in months. The trigger seemed minor. His peas touched his mashed potatoes, but I knew better. This was accumulated stress exploding outward. He threw his plate, screamed until his voice went hoarse, and hit himself repeatedly before I could intervene. As I held him through the aftermath, applying deep pressure and humming his favorite song, I realized what they were doing. They were creating the very instability they'd accused me of. Every action designed to push us toward breakdown, to create evidence of the chaos they claimed already existed. The security cameras caught someone trying our doors at 3 a.m. Tuesday night, just testing, jiggling handles, running when the motion lights activated. I watched the footage with coffee-shaken hands while my son slept, finally peaceful after hours of insomnia. The figure was careful to keep their face hidden, but I recognized the walk. Wednesday brought a new low. Dead flowers on our doorstep with a card. For the funeral of our family relationship. My son found them first, confused by the dying plants. He wanted to water them, fix them, make them alive again. I had to explain that some things couldn't be fixed. His literal mind struggled with the metaphor. The private investigator made himself known Thursday, approaching neighbors with questions about our home life. Did they hear yelling? See anything concerning? Notice any strange behaviors? Mrs. Chen from next door called to warn me. She told him nothing, bless her, but others might not be so discreet. By Friday, the weight of constant vigilance was crushing us both. My son had regressed in potty training, something that hadn't been an issue for 2 years. He'd started insisting on sleeping in my room, building a nest of blankets on the floor. His vocabulary, usually so advanced, had simplified to basic needs and wants. That afternoon, his school called again. There'd been an incident, not with pickup this time. Someone had called claiming my son was being exploited, that forcing an autistic child to testify was abuse, that keeping him from his loving grandparents was isolation. The school stood by us, but the accusations were piling up. I found myself checking locks as obsessively as my son, installing new apps to monitor our security system, jumping at every car that slowed near our house. The hypervigilance was exhausting, but necessary. They were watching, waiting, looking for any crack in our defenses. Saturday morning, my son asked a question that stopped me cold. Were the bad people going to take him away anyway, even though the judge said no? His faith in rules and authority, once absolute, was crumbling. I held him close, promising protection I wasn't sure I could provide. The weekend passed in a blur of indoor activities and security checks. We ventured out only once to his favorite sensory-friendly playground, but even there, I felt watched. Every parent looked suspicious. Every car in the parking lot seemed threatening. My son picked up on my anxiety, his play becoming repetitive and joyless. Sunday night, as I tucked him in with his 17 required prepared stuffed animals in precise order. He looked at me with those two wise eyes. He asked if he'd done something wrong in court, if telling the truth had made the bad people want to hurt us. The guilt in his voice shattered me. I spent hours reassuring him. His honesty was brave. His truth was important. The bad people were angry because they didn't get their way, not because he did anything wrong. But even as I spoke, I wondered if I'd failed him, if preparing him for court had just painted a bigger target on his back. Monday arrived with new threats, not texts this time. Photos slipped under our door. Me at the grocery store, my son at therapy, us at the park last month. Each one annotated with times, dates, observations, building a case that we were always watched, always documented, never safe. The security system became our lifeline. Every beep a potential threat, every camera angle a window to danger. My son started naming the cameras, giving them personalities. The front door camera was Mr. Watchful. The driveway camera was Sally Sentry, his way of making the surveillance feel less scary. Tuesday's mail brought legal documents. They were filing motions, claiming the court hadn't considered all evidence, that my son's testimony was coached, that his autism was being used as a weapon against loving grandparents. The papers felt heavy with threat. The war was far from over. That night, I sat in the dark living room, watching camera feeds on my phone. My son slept fitfully upstairs, mumbling in his dreams about bad people and broken rules. Outside, the world looked normal, suburban, safe, but I knew better. Somewhere out there, they were planning, plotting, preparing their next move. The irony wasn't lost on me. We'd won in court. The judge had seen the truth. My son's brave testimony had saved us. But victory had only escalated the conflict. Legal decisions meant nothing to people who believed they were entitled to my child, who saw his autism as proof of my inadequacy, rather than part of who he was. I thought about the coming days. More threats, probably. More attempts to destabilize our life. More evidence gathering for whatever legal assault they planned next. The exhaustion felt bone deep, but giving up wasn't an option. My son needed me stable, strong, present, even if I was falling apart inside. As dawn broke Thursday morning, I made breakfast while reviewing security footage from the night, clear for once. My son came down in his dinosaur pajamas, immediately checking that I'd separated his foods properly on his plate. He ate in his specific order: proteins, then vegetables, then carbs. Some things, at least, remained constant. He looked up at me between bites, his expression serious. Asked if we were safe today. I told him yes, hating the uncertainty in my voice. He nodded, accepting it, and returned to his breakfast. But I saw him glance at the door, at the windows, at all the places bad people might enter. 5 years old and already learning to live in fear. My phone rang during breakfast cleanup. The caller ID showed my son's autism support group. The coordinator's voice sounded strained as she explained that someone claiming to be a family friend had called with concerns about me exploiting my child's disability for custody advantages. The group had received multiple calls warning that I was using their resources to manipulate my son. She assured me they didn't believe it, but wanted me aware of the campaign against us. My son overheard fragments of the conversation from his spot organizing his train collection. His hands moved faster, sorting and resorting the same engines repeatedly. When I hung up, he approached me with that direct way he had, asking if I'd done something wrong in court. The question hit like a physical blow. I knelt down, explaining that sometimes people get angry when they lose and try to hurt others with lies. His logical mind processed this slowly, struggling with the concept of adults lying on purpose. The doorbell interrupted us. Through the peephole, I saw a man in a cheap suit holding a clipboard. Private investigator. I didn't answer, but watched through the window as he photographed our house from multiple angles. My son pressed against my leg, his breathing getting shallow. After 10 minutes, the man left a business card wedged in the doorframe and drove away in an unmarked sedan. That afternoon brought another call from my lawyer. Jared had filed a police report claiming I'd threatened him during our last encounter at school pickup. The accusation twisted my defensive reaction into aggression, painting me as unstable and dangerous. My lawyer advised staying away from all family members and documenting every interaction. The irony wasn't lost on me. Protecting ourselves was being reframed as evidence of guilt. My son's behavioral regression accelerated throughout the week. He started hitting himself when frustrated, something we'd worked years to overcome. His teachers reported increased meltdowns at school, difficulty transitioning between activities, and refusal to participate in group work. Each incident became another data point for my ex-wife's family to use against me. The stress they created was manufacturing the exact problems they claimed already existed. Friday's mail contained a thick envelope from my ex-wife's family's attorney. They'd hired an autism specialist who would testify that my preparation of my son for court constituted psychological manipulation of a vulnerable child. The report dissected his testimony word by word, claiming to find evidence of coaching and rehearsal. They turned our practice sessions, meant to reduce his anxiety, into proof of exploitation. The weekend brought no relief. My son woke screaming from nightmares 3 times Saturday night. Each time he checked every lock in the house before he could settle back down. His sleep deprivation made his sensory issues worse, leading to meltdowns over clothing textures and food temperatures that hadn't bothered him in months. I documented everything, knowing it would likely be used against me but needing records for our defense. My ex-wife's family escalated their social media campaign. Screenshots appeared in local parenting groups, showing edited portions of my son's court testimony. They removed context to make him sound rehearsed and unnatural, claiming I'd forced an autistic child to perform for the court. Parents I'd known for years started avoiding me at pickup. The narrative was shifting, and I couldn't fight it without looking defensive. Monday morning, my boss called me in again. The anonymous complaints had increased. Someone was calling daily, claiming I was unstable and shouldn't be around the company's clients. HR had opened an investigation. Though they found no merit to the claims, the constant disruption was affecting business. He placed me on administrative leave, pending resolution of my personal situation. The loss of income hit immediately. I'd already depleted savings on legal fees. My son noticed the change in routine when I didn't leave for work. His anxiety spiked without the predictable schedule we'd maintained for years. He started asking repeatedly when I would go back to work, when things would be normal again. I had no answers that wouldn't increase his distress. We spent the day building elaborate train layouts, but his play lacked its usual imaginative spark. The school called Tuesday afternoon. My son had hidden under his desk during math class and refused to come out. When his teacher tried to coax him, he'd screamed that the bad people were coming to take him away. The incident report would go in his file, another piece of evidence about his deteriorating condition under my care. The principal suggested we consider additional support services, unaware that every recommendation would be twisted into proof of my inadequacy. Wednesday brought a new low. My ex-wife appeared at my door with a court-appointed supervisor. She looked healthy, put together, nothing like the woman who'd abandoned us. She'd completed a rehabilitation program and petitioned for supervised visitation. The court had granted it based on her demonstrated commitment to recovery. My son hid behind me, his whole body trembling at the sight of her. The visitation was torture. My ex-wife had clearly been coached. She used all the right autism-friendly techniques, spoke in calm tones, and brought sensory-appropriate activities. My son remained frozen throughout, dissociating in a way I hadn't seen since her worst days. But to the supervisor, it looked like a child adjusting to reunion with his mother. Every attempt I made to comfort him was noted as interference. That night, my son's meltdown lasted 3 hours. He hit himself repeatedly, screaming that he didn't want to see the mean lady again. His arms were bruised by morning, marks that would be photographed and documented by the next supervisor. I held him through it all, knowing that comforting him would be seen as enabling, but unable to watch him suffer alone. The private investigator's presence became constant. He interviewed neighbors, asking about domestic disturbances and unusual behavior. Mrs. Chen called to warn me that he'd offered her money for information about our daily routines. She'd refused, but others might not be so loyal. Every interaction outside our home became a potential trap. Every conversation, possible evidence against us. My ex-wife's second visit went worse than the first. She brought her parents, claiming they needed to rebuild family bonds. My son completely shut down, going nonverbal and stimming intensely. The supervisor noted his regression in family presence, without acknowledging who had caused the trauma. When my ex-mother-in-law tried to hug him, he screamed and ran to his room. They left early, but not before documenting his rejection of extended family. The financial pressure mounted. With no income and legal bills piling up, I started selling anything valuable. My son noticed when his therapy appointments decreased from twice weekly to once. He asked if we were running out of money, his literal mind connecting the dots with frightening accuracy. I reassured him we were fine, hating the lie but unable to burden him with adult fears. My lawyer called with worse news. The court had ordered a comprehensive custody evaluation based on concerning patterns of behavior and regression. The evaluator would interview us, observe interactions, and review all documentation. Everything my ex-wife's family had manufactured would be presented as evidence. The system designed to protect children was being weaponized against us. The evaluator arrived Thursday morning. Dr. Benji seemed professional but distant, taking notes on every interaction. My son, overwhelmed by the stranger in our space, had a meltdown within minutes. He threw his breakfast plate, screamed about his foods touching, and hit himself when I tried to help. Every behavior amplified by stress became evidence of an unstable home environment. During the interview, my son's answers reflected his trauma. He talked about bad people trying to take him, checking locks, and being scared of the mean lady. To me, these were reasonable responses to harassment. To the evaluator, they suggested I was creating a fearful environment and alienating him from family. The truth was invisible beneath the manufactured narrative. My ex-wife's family filed new motions claiming I was isolating my son from extended family and denying him normal relationships. They cited his refusal to engage during visits, his fear of them, and his regression as evidence that I was psychologically abusing him. The irony that they'd created these very behaviors through harassment was lost on the legal system. The autism community that had once supported us began to distance themselves. The constant calls and accusations had made me radioactive. Support group leaders suggested I take a break until things settled. Online forums where I'd found advice and comfort became hostile spaces where people questioned whether I was exploiting my son's disability. The isolation was complete. My son's regression accelerated. He stopped using the toilet independently, refused to dress himself, and insisted on being carried everywhere. Years of hard-won progress evaporated under the constant stress. Each step backward provided more ammunition for those claiming I couldn't meet his needs. The evaluation report would note every regression without acknowledging its cause. The school expressed increasing concern. My son's academic performance plummeted. He couldn't focus, refused to participate, and spent most days under his weighted blanket in the calm-down corner. Teachers who'd celebrated his progress now documented his decline. Special education meetings that once focused on advancement now discussed managing deterioration. My ex-wife's third visit brought a breakthrough for them. She arrived with gifts and his favorite foods, having clearly studied his preferences. When he reluctantly accepted a toy train, she cried with apparent joy. The supervisor noted the positive progress in relationship building. That my son immediately gave me the train and whispered he didn't want it went unrecorded. The custody evaluator's preliminary report devastated us. It noted my son's significant behavioral regression, high anxiety levels, and resistance to family reunification. The recommendation was for graduated increase in mother's involvement and therapeutic intervention to address alienation. Everything we'd endured was invisible. Only the symptoms they'd caused remained as evidence against me. My ex-wife's family immediately petitioned for expanded visitation based on the report. They wanted overnight visits, claiming my son needed normalized family relationships. The thought of him spending nights away from me, with people who'd traumatized him, made me physically ill, but fighting it would be seen as further evidence of my unwillingness to support reunification. The financial situation became desperate. I'd sold everything of value and maxed out credit cards on legal fees. The mortgage payment was overdue. My son noticed the empty spaces where furniture used to be, the missing electronics, the bare walls. His routine-dependent mind struggled with each change, adding to his mounting distress. My lawyer advised considering a settlement. Fighting was destroying us financially and emotionally. My ex-wife's family had resources to continue indefinitely. They'd offered joint custody with my ex-wife, supervised by her parents. The thought of surrendering made me sick, but watching my son deteriorate daily was worse. I had days to decide. That night, I found my son arranging his stuffed animals in a protective circle around his bed. He explained they were keeping the bad people away while he slept. His elaborate rituals for safety broke my heart. 5 years old and constructing defenses against adults who should have protected him. I sat with him until he fell asleep, memorizing his face, fearing our time was running out. The next morning brought another horror. Someone had called Child Protective Services with new allegations. They claimed I was medically neglecting my son by reducing therapy appointments. The investigation would require home visits, interviews, and documentation reviews. Another agency to convince of our truth while fighting the narrative my ex-wife's family had constructed. My son overheard me on the phone with my lawyer. His face crumpled as he asked if I was giving up on him, if that's why I sounded sad. I pulled him close, promising I'd never give up, even as I wondered if fighting was hurting him more than surrendering would. The impossible choice loomed: continue the battle that was destroying him, or hand him over to those who'd caused his trauma. The CPS worker arrived that afternoon. She seemed kind but thorough, noting everything from our security measures to my son's behavioral challenges. He clung to me throughout her visit, refusing to speak directly to her. His selective mutism, a new development, would be added to the growing list of concerns about his well-being under my care. That evening, while making dinner with carefully separated foods, I watched my son perform his new safety rituals, checking locks, counting his trains, arranging his sensory tools in precise patterns. The vibrant, curious child who'd bravely testified was disappearing, replaced by an anxious shell focused solely on survival. They were winning by destroying who he was. My ex-wife's family posted another update to their GoFundMe, claiming they needed funds to rescue my son from an increasingly unstable situation. They shared photos from the supervised visits, carefully cropped to show only moments when he appeared calm. The comments section filled with outrage about the poor grandmother being kept from her grandchild. The public narrative was complete. Friday's mail brought the final blow. The court had scheduled a hearing to review custody arrangements based on substantial change in circumstances. The evidence would include my job loss, financial instability, my son's behavioral regression, CPS investigation, and the evaluator's report. Everything they'd orchestrated would be presented as reasons to modify custody. We had 2 weeks to prepare for what felt like an execution. My son must have sensed my despair. He brought me his favorite train, the one he never let anyone touch, and placed it in my hands, his way of comforting me when he could barely function himself. I held him close, breathing in his familiar scent, wondering how many more bedtimes we'd have together. The countdown to our next court date had begun, and this time, I feared we wouldn't emerge victorious. The autism support groups that once helped me now avoided my calls. Their coordinator explained they couldn't risk association with someone under CPS investigation. The isolation strategy was working perfectly. My son noticed the absence of our weekly group meetings, another routine disrupted. He arranged his trains in tighter formations, building walls within walls. My ex-wife's family hired a second expert, this one specializing in parental alienation syndrome. The expert reviewed videos from supervised visits, noting my son's unnatural fear responses and coached avoidance behaviors. They ignored that these same behaviors appeared whenever he encountered anyone who'd hurt him. The report recommended immediate intervention to prevent further psychological damage from my influence. Thursday morning, I woke to find my son had moved every piece of furniture he could manage against his bedroom door. The barricade took 20 minutes to dismantle while he watched from his closet, wrapped in his weighted blanket. His explanation was simple and heartbreaking. The bad people might come while I was sleeping. No amount of reassurance could convince him otherwise. The CPS investigation intensified. They interviewed his teachers, his former therapist, even the grocery store clerk who knew us. Each interview focused on signs of neglect or abuse, with questions clearly influenced by the allegations. My son's regression became their primary concern, though they refused to acknowledge its obvious cause. The investigator scheduled another home visit, this time unannounced. My lawyer called with an ultimatum from my ex-wife's family: drop opposition to expanded visitation or face criminal charges for the threatening behavior Jared had reported. They'd gathered witness statements from parents at school who'd seen me aggressively confront him during pickup. The truth, that I'd simply asked him to leave us alone, had been twisted beyond recognition. Friday brought the CPS surprise visit. My son was in full meltdown mode when they arrived, having spilled juice on his favorite train. The investigator walked in to find him hitting himself while I tried to apply deep pressure. She documented everything: the self-harm, the excessive security measures, the concerning level of routine rigidity. My explanations fell on deaf ears. The custody review hearing loomed closer. My lawyer prepared me for the worst. The judge would see a father who'd lost his job, couldn't afford therapy, lived in a fortress of security cameras, with a child showing severe behavioral regression. The narrative my ex-wife's family had crafted was complete. Truth had become irrelevant in the face of manufactured evidence. My son stopped eating solid foods, surviving on protein shakes and crackers. His weight dropped noticeably. The school nurse called daily with concerns. Each call generated another report, another piece of evidence about my inability to meet his basic needs. I bought different brands, tried new flavors, even shaped crackers into train formations. Nothing worked. The financial collapse accelerated. Foreclosure notices arrived. Utility shutoff warnings piled up. I sold my car, keeping only the aging minivan for emergencies. My son noticed immediately. Another change in his environment, another source of instability. He asked if we were becoming homeless, a concept he'd learned from a library book. I lied again, promising everything would be fine. My ex-wife's supervised visits became bi-weekly. Each one destroyed my son a little more. He developed a new ritual, hiding his favorite possessions before she arrived, convinced she'd take them. The supervisor documented this as hoarding behavior and material attachment issues. Nobody asked why a 5-year-old felt the need to protect his belongings from his mother. The second custody evaluation proved worse than the first. Dr. Benji observed my son's complete shutdown during my ex-wife's visit, his violent reaction to his grandmother's presence, his desperate clinging when they tried to leave with him for an assessment. Every traumatized response was cataloged as evidence of my negative influence. The evaluator recommended immediate placement with stable family members. I made the mistake of confronting the private investigator. He'd been photographing my son at therapy, violating medical privacy. My demand that he stop was recorded, witnessed, and reported as aggressive behavior and paranoid confrontation. Another piece of evidence in their growing file. Another example of my instability. The school called an emergency meeting. My son's behavior had become unmanageable. He spent entire days under his desk, refused to interact with peers, and had bitten an aide during a transition. They recommended a more restrictive placement, one special specializing in severe behavioral challenges. The bright, verbal child who testified so eloquently was disappearing before our eyes. My ex-wife filed for emergency custody based on the school's concerns. Her lawyer argued that my son needed immediate intervention from family who could provide stability. The motion included statements from teachers, the CPS investigator, both custody evaluators, and multiple concerned community members. The hearing was scheduled for Monday, 3 days to prepare for losing everything. That weekend, I watched my son construct elaborate defensive structures with his remaining toys. He explained each fortification's purpose. This wall stopped bad people. That moat caught liars. These towers watched for danger. His play had become entirely focused on protection and survival. The imaginative stories about train adventures were gone, replaced by endless scenarios of defense against threats. Sunday night, he refused to sleep. He sat in my lap, holding his favorite train, asking the same questions over and over. Would I still love him if he had to live somewhere else? Could he take his trains? Would the labels stay on his shelves? I answered each question honestly, my heart breaking with every word. He fell asleep, clutching my shirt, his small fist refusing to let go even in unconsciousness. Monday morning arrived with brutal finality. I dressed my son in his court clothes, the same outfit he'd worn for his triumphant testimony. He looked smaller now, hollowed out by months of fear. His hands shook as I helped him button his shirt. He asked if he had to talk again. I told him probably not. The relief and disappointment on his face were equally heartbreaking. The courtroom felt different this time. My ex-wife's family filled their side, confident and prepared. My ex-wife sat with her parents, looking every inch the recovered mother ready to reclaim her child. Their lawyer had boxes of evidence, documented proof of everything they'd orchestrated. We had only the truth, and truth had proven worthless against manipulation. The judge reviewed the evidence methodically. My job loss, financial instability, son's regression, CPS concerns, evaluation recommendations. Each point built their case stronger. My lawyer tried to explain the harassment campaign, but without proof, it sounded like paranoid delusions. The security cameras, the locks, the hypervigilance, all painted as unstable behavior rather than protective responses. When they brought my son in for observation, he shut down completely, nonverbal, stimming intensely, refusing eye contact with anyone. The judge asked him simple questions. He remained silent, rocking in his chair, occasionally humming the song I used to calm him. His silence was interpreted as fear of me, rather than terror of the situation. Every behavior they'd caused was now evidence against me. The judge's decision came swiftly. Temporary custody to my ex-wife, supervised by her parents. Supervised visitation for me, pending completion of parenting classes and psychological evaluation. The goal was reunification. Once I'd addressed my issues, the gavel came down with finality. I'd lost him, not through abandonment or abuse, but through loving him too fiercely to let him go. The transfer happened immediately. Court officers explained I couldn't go home with him to pack. His things would be collected later. My son's scream when they told him pierced the courtroom. He fought them, hitting, biting, dropping to the floor in full meltdown. They had to carry him out, his cries of dad echoing through the halls. I wasn't allowed to comfort him, wasn't allowed to explain, wasn't allowed to say goodbye properly. I drove home to an empty house. His trains sat exactly where he'd left them, arranged in defensive formations. His weighted blanket still held the shape of his small body. The labels on his shelves seemed to mock me. All that careful organization for a child who wouldn't see it again. I left everything untouched, unable to bear dismantling his world. The first supervised visit came a week later. My son had regressed completely. Nonverbal, aggressive, self-harming constantly. He'd bitten his grandmother twice, destroyed his room at their house, refused all food except crackers. When he saw me, he collapsed, clinging so tightly they had to pry him off when time ended. The supervisor noted his extreme reaction as concerning. My ex-wife's family posted triumphant updates about saving their grandson. Photos showed him restrained in a specialized chair, sedated for his own safety, enrolled in intensive behavioral therapy to address his learned behaviors. The vibrant child who'd stood up in court was gone, replaced by a traumatized shell they could manage and control. Months passed in a blur of supervised visits, each one more heartbreaking than the last. My son's spark dimmed further with every week. He stopped making eye contact, stopped speaking even to me. The boy who'd quoted legal codes now communicated only through behavior, and every behavior screamed his pain. But the system saw only a difficult child finally receiving proper care. I channeled my rage into advocacy, started documenting other families destroyed by similar tactics, found parents whose autistic children had been weaponized against them, built a network of people who understood that love could be reframed as harm, that protection could be painted as paranoia, that fighting for your child could cost you everything. The supervised visits ended when my son's behavior became too disruptive. He'd attacked a supervisor who tried to end our hug early. My ex-wife's family successfully argued that my presence destabilized him. The judge agreed to suspend visits until he showed improvement. We both knew that meant never. The system required him to accept his imprisonment before allowing him to see the person he loved most. I kept paying child support from whatever work I could find, kept his room exactly as he'd left it, kept hoping someday he'd understand that letting him go was the only way to stop his destruction, that surrendering wasn't abandonment, but the last act of protection I could offer, that sometimes love means accepting defeat to end your child's suffering. Years would pass before I'd see him again. He'd find me eventually, damaged but determined, carrying scars from battles he never should have fought. He'd ask why I let them take him. I'd tell him the truth, that watching him disappear while fighting was worse than losing him entirely, that choosing his survival over my rights was the hardest thing I'd ever done. That love sometimes looks like abandonment to eyes too young to understand sacrifice. But for now, I sat in his room, holding his favorite train, surrounded by the fortress he'd built against a world that proved him right to be afraid. The labels remained on his shelves, waiting. The security cameras kept their vigil, recording nothing. And somewhere across town, a brilliant autistic boy learned to hide his light to survive in a family that saw his difference as something to fix rather than celebrate. The war was over. They'd won by destroying what they claimed to save, and I'd lost everything by refusing to let them destroy it completely. The only victory was in the fragments fragments of him I'd preserved, the memory of his courage in that first trial, before they taught him fear was safer than truth.